So our next speaker is Dr. Rocky Romero. Rocky is a former assistant professor from the New Mexico Highlands University School of Social Work in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and is also a graduate of NMHU and Northern New Mexico Community College. He serves as the co-chair for the Governor Richardson-appointed New Mexico Higher Education Department Cultural Competency Task Force. Dr. Romero has also served as an executive council member for the New Mexico Consortium of Behavioral Health Training and Researchers. In addition, Dr. Romero completed his doctoral studies at the University of New Mexico in Language, Literacy, and Social Cultural Studies and graduated in 2016. He is focused on culturally appropriate treatment while focusing on health disparities and access for health and mental health care in New Mexico for people of color. So with you, Dr. Rocky Romero.
All right. Hello, everybody. I get the task of keeping you awake after lunch, and thank you to Haned who gave us some electric energy and some good energy to feed off of. So I'm Rocky. Again, I want to first of all thank Colorado State University. Thank you to Dr. Shillington for inviting us, and for, of course, Dr. Zayas kind of initiating this connection with the Mental Health Technology Transfer Center team out of Puerto Rico. I, unfortunately, am not from Puerto Rico, which sometimes I wish I was, of course. But I'm from Albuquerque, right down the road from you all. So I tend to spend a lot of time northern New Mexico, Colorado, southern Colorado, and I'm excited to be able to share a topic that is usually one that is a little taboo still in our communities, right, when we start to look at suicidality. But I also want to take an opportunity to thank Dr. Zayas and Dr. Torres and, of course, Dr. Hernandez. As you can imagine, those are some big hitters to follow as I come up and speak to you all. But the cool thing about it is this team that the Hispanic, Latino Mental Health Technology and Transfer Center has put together really puts in position an opportunity for you all to leverage this resource and leverage this expertise to then help you develop strategies that'll best serve Latino and Hispanic populations. And the really cool thing about that, for those of you that are organizers and community-based organizations, SAMHSA fits the bill for those services, right? So take advantage of that, leverage that resource that you have today. Before I get into my presentation, which again, today it's focused on adverse childhood experiences, which is not a new phenomenon, right? I think it's kind of one of those topics that now is starting to be recycled through our behavioral health world. And I'm going to kind of focus on adverse childhood experiences, looking at it from a child or adolescent who has experienced immigration and acculturation. Right, so we kind of put that overview within adverse childhood experiences. Suicide prevention approaches with Latino children and youth is what I'll focus probably right around the midpoint of this topic on. And then at the end, what I really want to do is be able to share some resources with you all. The presentation that I'm going to cover really is an opportunity to also just share some links with you. So within the presentation that you guys will be sent or you'll get access to, there's some embedded links within that presentation that will give you access to some of those resources. So before I get started, as we talk about ACEs, I want to kind of give this broad kind of view, if you will, for just a minute. And talk about what Dr. Hernandez had not talked about relative to harm reduction, right? We have to do our due diligence when it comes to understanding not only you as an individual practitioner of where you sit with harm reduction compared to or versus abstinence-based approaches, right? Some folks feel like abstinence-based is the only way to go, and we have to get there by just cutting cold turkey. Well, that's a very dangerous approach, right, when we talk about medical concerns relative especially to substance abuse and addiction. So before I get into the presentation, ACEs, as we talk about this, I want to kind of break it down into three different categories that we want to look at based on harm reduction approaches. So first is suicidality, which is somewhat the main points that I'm going to talk about today, but we also have to look from the Latino Hispanic population, especially as Latino males and females get into their adolescent ages. We also have to look at violence and gang gang involvement, right? So that's one of the suites that the MHTTC has put together, and we're going to be revising that, is looking at Latino and Hispanic youth gangs, and being able to give you all as practitioners opportunities to not only seek some evidence-based approaches, but also some, as was spoken about earlier, emerging practice or best practices. And then the third kind of arm, if you will, of this harm reduction approach is looking at substance use, abuse, and misuse, right? We have to be able to really be differentiating between a client that is able to be clinically diagnosed with substance use disorder, but what about all those young people that are misusing drugs and alcohol or experimenting? Should we pathologize those individuals, right, and get them in the system and start to kind of put them down that track of following them based on mental health and other issues? With this being said, I think we must approach Latino and Hispanic young people with being aware of their story, right? Ask them to tell you their story. Part of our cultural belief, and as was spoke about earlier, cultural elements are very important. And when we talk about familismo, or familiarity, family, that's a big part of someone's experience, is the story that they have to tell, right? And too often, if we're talking kind of a medical model or approach to this, we tend to skip past that history and that oral history that person or that family may be experiencing. So, one thing that I want to start with is just looking at this, and let me see if this is going to work for us. All right, there we go. So before we get into kind of the intervention and strategies relative to suicide prevention, gang and violence prevention, and substance use, misuse, abuse prevention, we also have to look at the importance of acculturation within this process. So there's a couple of slides in here, and I'm not going to take a lot of time on this, but I think given the experience that you all had this morning from Dr. Zayas's work in research, that experience for Daniel and those young people that experienced and that we saw in those videos, right, that trajectory of that individual's acculturation process is much different than somebody that has second generation, third generation experiences with acculturation. And I'll explain a little bit more about that. So just so that we're all on the same page and reading from the same sheet of music, the impact of mental health on acculturation, what we have to understand is that the process in which members of one group adapt the beliefs and behaviors of another group. And what we know from that is that, especially with Latino youth and adolescents, their acculturation process is kind of in warp speed when you look at it compared to maybe their caregiver or their parent or their grandparent even. A lot of folks, obviously, I'm sure some of you are working with people, young people who are being raised by their grandparents, right? So when we talk about acculturation, because of smartphones, because of social media, because some of the resources that young people have available to them, their acculturation is much faster than it would be for, let's say, an adult that doesn't have that much exposure. Acculturation can be reciprocal. Of course, that is that the dominant group may also adapt patterns typical to the minority group. The third bullet that I want to really talk about is looking at how not everybody's experience with acculturation is the same, and many are very traumatic. Part of what we see, and when we start to talk about ACES, and I'll get to that in just a couple of minutes, we kind of look at three broad categories of adverse childhood experiences. So I want to interject those three aspects as we're kind of looking at this community-based approach to intervention or prevention and intervention. So the three that we'll kind of look at and talk about intertwined within this presentation is adverse childhood experiences, adverse community experiences, and adverse climate experiences, right? So now what we're seeing, obviously, with the introduction and exposure of social media is how young people are being affected when it comes to suicidality and other things with that tool and resource of social media. Now, with those resources and tools, we are having a discussion at lunch. The smartphone and the iPad and technology, it's not going anywhere. right? So how do we find opportunities to leverage that tool and resource to initiate prevention strategies, to give opportunities to young people for them to seek out help and services that they need relative to suicidality. So the next slide here looks at acculturation, and these two slides are actually taken from our clinical formulation training that really looks at, as well as Haned did earlier, kind of pulling in some of these cultural elements. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time with all of you so that you're not you're getting a little bit of this cultural elements piece in the acculturation, especially since we're not able to do that full training obviously here today. But I'm hopeful that some of you reach out and we get some requests to come back and do some of those cultural element trainings. So, acculturation stress. The process in which members of one cultural group adopt the beliefs and behaviors of another group. Acculturation stress includes leaving family and friends and creating a new social network, right? So you can imagine that stress and what that is experienced like for somebody that is going through immigration, right? As Dr. Zayas talked about this morning and showed us vivid pictures in graphic videos about, imagine how many experiences, or not experiences, adverse childhood experiences, I should say, that individual is already experiencing by the age of 2 or 3 years old, right? And in just a moment, we're going to talk about what that looks like. If you have 2 or 3 ACEs, how much percentage is it more like for you to experience X, Y, or Z? Right, and some of those numbers are actually very astounding and profound. So lastly here, usually the person's physical and mental health is affected, right? So part of what we have to understand, and I think that's the importance of using the mental health technology and transfer center expertise to help you develop, and I heard the question earlier, what are the assessment tools that you would recommend to utilize with this population in order to get that data, in order to be able to identify those issues? Well, I think there's already existing instruments that you all are using. What it would be more of is us helping you to develop specific questions that you could ask that would actually help you get at that information, right? And doing so in a way that is not going to re-traumatize the individual by asking these questions again of them. So with that said, the other piece to this is acculturation gaps, and I kind of touched on this a little bit when we talked about the experience that young people have, Latino and Hispanic young people have relative to immigration, is the acculturation experience that they have, there may be a severe gap between what their caregivers have experienced as well. So we have to be able to, or you as providers, future clinicians, social workers need to be asking those questions, right? And one of the things that we're doing in New Mexico is offering grandparents raising grandchildren courses, where we go into this training and we talk about these issues and we teach people about social media and how to also limit that exposure that their young person may have to social media that may be adverse to them. So those are things that we really want to make sure today that we share with you is really allowing people to tell you their story of acculturation. What was your experience? And asking young people, what was your experience? If they are first or second or third generation, what was your experience? What was your family's experience with the immigration process, right? And I think the really cool thing that I'm seeing today, which is awesome, is it's always good to do a presentation with people that are familiar or have look like me or are familiar to me, but it's also really cool to see a lot of different faces that don't look like me or us as our team, right? Meaning that we're trying to get this information out to different races and different cultures, as you all are going to come across Latino and Hispanic individuals and really have to be prepared to be able to experience that. And I think it's important to echo what was mentioned earlier, right? Social workers in the room. How many social workers? Yes. Social worker, licensed clinical social worker myself. So I see that aspect of really being able to be that advocate, right? When we talk about the different hats that we wear, is become an advocate for Latino and Hispanic youth, even if you don't mirror them in terms of how you look or your race or ethnicity. As long as you're genuine and you're building trust and you're always transparent in what you're doing, you're going to be able to build those relationships with Latino and Hispanic youths. So one thing that we want to also kind of want to note here is There's different studies that obviously show the vulnerable and psychological stresses associated with immigration and acculturation, and I think I couldn't have had a better segue or speakers that kind of led that groundwork this morning, right, with talking about the immigration process and what that looks like for many individuals now that we have these detention centers. And honestly, let's be honest, prisoner camps, right, and let's call them what they are and label them what they are. With that said, looking at this from kind of the ACES perspective, like I mentioned, there's three larger categories that we want to consider. So what I'd ask you to do is really be able to start to identify the client population that you're serving, whether it's in a practicum setting or whether it's in a direct service as a practitioner setting, or you as faculty members that are teaching these clinical skills, is being able to identify within the childhood, community, and climate experiences what may adversely affect the individuals that you're seeing. And what that looks like in terms of a picture that you can kind of draw from it. So some of the things that we want to share, that I want to share with you as I get into the ACES piece of things, is really looking at it from, ACES are common. Nearly 2/3 or 64% of adults have at least one adverse childhood experience. So many of us sitting in this room, right, that have had an experience would be in a position to where that experience may affect us long term. Experiences, of course, with trauma and things of that nature. The more ACEs you have, let me take one step back. So ACEs don't occur alone, right? That's one thing that we have to understand, is typically with 87% of the population that has one ACE, chances are they have 2 or 3 ACEs as well, right? Or 2 or 3 adverse childhood experiences. So when there's one, that tells you that you should do more investigation and asking of those questions around what that looks like for that individual. Now, the troublesome part now comes into where we start to see the more ACEs you have, the greater risk of other chronic disease, right? I think it's very important, and my presentation doesn't do this so much, but when we talk about the brain chemistry and when individuals are constantly in fight or flight mode, right, our cortisol is dumped into our blood, and that starts to increase stress and increase heart disease and all these other factors within our body. So we have to understand that when individuals are experiencing crisis and have gone through this immigration process and experience adverse childhood experiences, and then may have a trigger a year later, 2 years later, while at school, while in the playground, all of that kind of comes back to them, right? It's very similar to post-traumatic stress in that sense. Now, I think the other piece that you all have to understand that we haven't talked about today, which is much more done within the indigenous or native communities, but Dr. Braveheart talks about the impact of historical trauma, right? And vicarious trauma through oral history that has been passed down. Even individuals that have never experienced colonization at that level, because of the stories of their ancestors and their grandparents that have been told to them, they may be experiencing secondary or tertiary trauma, right? So we have to be able to assess that appropriately. I want to read a small paragraph here, so bear with me. So the more ACEs you have, the greater risk of chronic disease, as I just mentioned. People have an ACE score of 10, right? Just so we're all on the same page when you kind of hear ACEs and people talk about it, just so you know kind of what the relative terms mean. Each type of trauma counts as 1, no matter how many times it occurs. So when you talk about that trauma, right, especially when we're looking at this from different situations that Latino and Hispanic youth may experience, and when we look at acculturation, it creates different stresses. When you look at immigration, it creates different stressors within the family, right? Family fights and disagreements, domestic violence, those sort of things. So imagine in a domestic violence setting, when domestic violence happens repeatedly, those ACEs are just kind of stacking on top of each other, right? Especially imagine if they're already coming with 2 or 3 ACEs from their immigration experience or migration experience as well. You can think of an ACE score kind of as a cholesterol score for childhood trauma. For example, people with an ACE score of 4 are twice as likely to be smokers and 7 times more likely to be a person dealing with alcohol. Having an ACE score of 4 increases the risk of emphysema or chronic bronchitis by nearly 400%. Right? So when we talk about the other chronic diseases that circle Latino and Hispanic groups, this exacerbates that, right, on top of those other chronic diseases. This is one that kind of leads us back to where we're and thank you for bearing with me, where we're going to spend a little bit more time now looking at the suicide aspects. Now, having 4 increases or 4 occurrences of a ACE, get this, increases attempted suicide by 1,200%. So again, 4 ACEs or more increases suicidality by 1,200%. Right? So when we're talking about it, and the presentation that Dr. Zayas is going to give, the webinar on Latinos and suicidality is very timely, right? Because we're seeing that happen and we're seeing that play out a lot now in our society, especially given the climate around politics and immigration and our borders and all of that kind of discourse that we see in our news today. So looking at the slides again, 61% of adults surveyed across 25 states reported that they had experienced at least one type of ACE. And nearly 1 in 6 reported they had experienced 4 or more types of ACEs. Preventing ACEs could potentially reduce a large number of health conditions. Like I told you, 1.9 million cases of heart disease, 21 million cases of depression could have potentially been avoided by preventing ACEs. Now, we're kind of in a position, or you all are in a position now, where we can't unring that bell, so to speak. Right? When they come to you in school systems and they've already experienced these ACEs, we can't necessarily go back to the prevention side of it necessarily. So how do we address that intervention-wise? And that's what the next several slides will start to focus on, is some models that are evidence-based, emerging models, and then I want to really share with you the importance of adapting those models again to be more culturally aware and appropriate. As we said, some children are at greater risk than others. Women in several racial, ethnic, and minority groups were at the greatest risk for experiencing 4 or more ACEs. And obviously that's the population we're talking about here, right? So on top of the fact that we're coming from a racial or ethnic group, women obviously with that experience, and we know that through the immigration process, a lot of times women along that process, and we had a really good presentation in Houston recently that talked about how frequently and how common it is for women along their immigration process to get raped along that process and along that way, right? So this not only talks about, for you all, the importance of addressing the youth and the adolescents that you see, but it's also for trying to assess parents and family along with that within a family unit, right? Is typically their experience with ACEs is prevalent as well. We just got to kind of do that work as well. So ACEs are costly. Of course, we can talk about that, but more importantly, they're costly longitudinally for the individuals that experience those ACEs. So types of ACEs, just so you kind of get a sense in general, and we'll kind of focus in or harness into more specifically the emotional and behavioral health side of this. But as you can imagine, there's 3 kind of broader categories like I talked about earlier: childhood abuse, neglect, household challenges. So when we talk about childhood abuse, that's a pretty easy title to kind of list what those may be, what that might entail, right? Childhood abuse. But when we look at household challenges, what might we see with household challenges, do you think? And just yell it out. What are you thinking when we're talking specifically about this population of adolescent or children from the Latino and Hispanic population that have experienced immigration, acculturation? What do you all think of when you see household challenges? What does that look like to you in some of your work? Say that again? Family separation. Absolutely. I heard. Sure. What do you think? Give me a couple or an idea. violence. Absolutely, sure. Right, and as you kind of go through that, and of course you can kind of see those that are here, those are the most prevalent ones, but you all have to be able to see what does that look like more specifically in your community, right? What does that look like in the daily life of the individuals that you're seeing? Is this a mirror of that or not, right? Does this fit or does it not fit? So a couple that I want to talk about, and Dr. Hernandez touched on these as well, but you see incarcerated household member, right? And at 5%. But some of the other ones that we see that are impactful that Dr. Zayas talked about was 23% separation or divorce. And again, there's not even the category here of separation at the detention center, right? And that experience. What is that new variable that we're going to see kind of fit within this, right? That I think Dr. Zayas' work is going to inform and probably update and impact some of these most significant variables that we're seeing in household challenges. But within that, the other piece that we don't see in here, and we can probably put it within emotional maybe, or here under emotional, but when we talk about separation anxiety, and the clinical aspects that Dr. Zayas talked about this morning, we also have to consider the attachment disorder that starts to take shape, right, for many of these young people. In one, their inability, because of the trauma and stresses that they're experiencing, to develop healthy relationships with other people, especially with caregivers or adults that they may have seen their adult caregivers get pulled away from them, right? Or leave them in their mind thinking that they left them or abandoned them. So looking at attachment disorder, I think, is another aspect that we definitely have to think about and consider. Now, those of you that are in the school systems, how many of you are school social work or school directly specific practitioners in school? So obviously a new push in the school world is social emotional learning, right? So I think that fits very well with some of the dynamics that we're seeing within the ACES program relative to social and emotional learning and how it's going to impact our clients, and being able to address that, I think, is key. So we can kind of break this down a little bit further when we're seeing this in terms of the adverse childhood experiences and how these may impact things long term. So I won't go into each of these in detail, but I want to spend a little bit of time in just kind of highlighting. So as we see here, traumatic brain injury, fractures, burns, of course, more injury, and we see that, of course, with adolescents and teens at a normal developmental stages, but when this is more profound, right, or we're seeing injuries relative to maybe child abuse or neglect, those are the things that we definitely have to spend some more time focusing on. Mental health, depression, anxiety, suicide, PTSD. In just a little bit at the end of this presentation, I'm going to share with you one county's kind of case study, if you will, in New Mexico that really looks at how are these experiences and variables being measured in the school system, and it's very telling. The third one, or fourth one here, or a third one, sorry, mental health. So unintended pregnancy complications, fetal death, of course, infectious disease, chronic disease, risky behaviors, and opportunities. The one that I wanted to spend just a little bit of time on here before I go forward is risky behaviors. And to me, that's the one that leads many Hispanic and Latino male youth into experiencing or getting involved in gang activity, getting pulled into those groups, right, where they're pushing away their family, but they're finding love and support within maybe a different type of gang. And that's the end of some of the end slides that you'll see will highlight that just a little bit for you. And then the last part, obviously, opportunities. If individuals are experiencing ACEs at a very high level, their ability to concentrate and focus and to follow through with tasks that requires them to be focused on, especially in education and school, obviously may be impacted. So there's some ways and strategies that that tells us that ACEs can be prevented. So I want to highlight a few of those. And this is taken from the Centers for Disease Control 2009. Again, they have a module here, and there's a link within my presentation that for those of you that access it can follow that link and get the whole toolkit and toolbox. But the evidence tells us that ACEs can be prevented by strengthening economic supports for families, promoting social norms that protect against violence and adversity, ensuring a strong start for children and paving the way for them to reach their full potential. Teaching skills to help parents and youth handle stress, manage emotions, and tackle everyday challenges, and connecting youth to caring adults and activities. And the last one here, intervening to lessen immediate and long-term harms. So part of what we have to really do, and I think that's the key strategy here. And the next slide, I'm gonna probably go forward in that, just given our time. But it's in there for you guys to view. The CDC has several different short video clips that they've put together on giving you ideas on how you can create a safer community, and a community that really helps to reduce exposure to ACEs in your specific community. So the last, or the video that I will just highlight or present to you very briefly is We Can Prevent ACEs. And again, it's a YouTube video. But I think, and let me just see what time we have. I think we have time. Let me see if I could pull it up real quickly. And again, it just kind of puts into a very simple, if I can find here. Well, I can't find the mouse. That would help. Damn it. No, I don't know if it's... Oh, there we go. I think I got it. Oh, maybe not. Oh, there we go.
No, because you're sharing this.
Okay, I got it. Thank you, sir.
This is my neighborhood. I grew up in this building. This is a great community now, but it's had its share of problems. When I was a kid, our community had high unemployment, a lack of resources for families, and lots of kids hanging out with no adult supervision. You might have heard about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. ACEs are traumatic events in childhood, like abuse and neglect, that can increase risk for future problems. But they don't have to. The good news is that ACEs and their consequences can be prevented. Take me, for example. I was at risk for ACEs, and despite all the things that put me at risk, some pretty incredible people helped make sure that I wouldn't become another statistic. Come on, I'll show you around. That's Jackson. He's a cool kid. His dad left when he was 2, and his mom works 2. Hi, this is my neighborhood. I grew up in this building. This is a great community now, but it's had its share of problems. When I was a kid, our community had high unemployment, a lack of resources for families, and lots of kids hanging out with no adult supervision. You might have heard about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. ACEs are traumatic events in childhood, like abuse and neglect, that can increase risk for future problems. But they don't have to. The good news is that ACEs and their consequences can be prevented. Take me, for example. I was at risk for ACEs, and despite all the things that put me at risk, some pretty incredible people helped make sure that I wouldn't become another statistic. Come on, I'll show you around. That's Jackson. He's a cool kid. His dad left when he was 2, and his mom works 2 jobs. I hang out with him every Thursday night and help him with his homework. Sometimes we grab ice cream. It's fun. Plus, he has another adult role model to learn from and trust. That's Mr. Martino. When I was a kid, he let me help him at the store sometimes after school when my parents were working late. He did that for a bunch of us. My dad actually found his job as a mechanic because of Mr. Martino. This helped our family in so many ways. Not only did my dad have a steady paycheck, which eased his stress about paying rent and buying necessities like food and clothes, but he was also a lot nicer to me, my brother, and my mom once he started working a job that made him feel good about himself. When communities come together, they can do so much to prevent ACEs. Mr. Martino and other local business owners put together a series of career workshops to help people like my dad find work. My mom also got a job with a company that allowed her to work from home and spend more time with me and my brother. Mariana has just gotten out of a class about handling challenges of single parenting. The clinic offers free childcare so Mariana's daughter, Ella, can play while Mariana's in class. The class helps parents like Mariana develop positive parenting skills, not just for babies and toddlers, but for teenagers too. This is another way our community has come together to give families the resources they need, and just one more way to prevent ACEs. This was my school, Riverside Middle, right in the heart of town. These kids are here for a sponsored summer camp. This community-supported program helps families with affordable, quality childcare and helps kids get tutoring and learn life skills. When I was a kid, I spent a lot of time at this school all year long. There was one counselor, Miss Greer, who I remember more than anyone. She was a really good listener. Miss Greer helped me and my brother get involved in after-school activities like baseball and soccer. Our coaches were super nice and were mentors to us. Staying after school for practice kept us and a lot of other kids out of trouble. When schools help take responsibility for preventing ACEs, everybody wins. My life could have gone in a completely different direction. Studies show that ACEs can have long-term negative effects on kids' health and well-being that may last into adulthood and even continue in future generations. But by people and groups taking action, ACEs can be prevented. In fact, there are 5 known strategies that help stop ACEs before they even start. You can implement them in your own community, just like we did. How? By strengthening economic support for families, by changing social norms to support parents in positive parenting, by providing quality care and education early in life, by enhancing parenting skills to promote healthy child development, and by intervening to lessen harms and prevent future risk. So, now you know my story, and you've seen the prevention strategies in my community that helped me beat the odds. I had healthy relationships with my family and friends. I learned how to take care of myself and make good choices. And today, I'm a mentor to other kids who need some extra help so they don't become an ACEs statistic. Safe, stable, and nurturing relationships and environments are essential to prevent child abuse and neglect and to assure that all kids reach their full potential. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Banana split? You got it.
Okay, let's see if we can get this back. All right.
Our brains develop and change throughout life, enabling us to learn and do new things and to adapt at every age. But childhood, and early childhood in particular, is the most sensitive and critical period for brain development. As a child interacts with the world, their experiences, both positive and negative, stimulate the brain, causing it to form neural.
No worries, man. All right, thank you. So again, and there, after this video, there's several others that play and just give you ideas. And again, what I really want to stress and why I showed this very simplistic video is we don't always have to do clinical approaches to things, right? Sometimes it's about the basics, getting people, and when we look at that, those of you, again, psychology trained, counselors trained, social work trained, looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs is very important, right? When we're talking about some of the very basics that people need. Sometimes that's all they need. They don't need to be clinically diagnosed and given medications and all those things. Sometimes taking care of the very basic needs, like helping mom find a job that's going to pay her a little bit more, that gives her time off, that gives her health care. Sometimes it's leveraging, again, workshops that'll help grandparents raising grandchildren, which is such a difficult thing to do nowadays with all the stresses. So with that said, again, it's giving you just kind of a short idea of what this looks like. So the next kind of section in my presentation really focuses on suicide prevention with Latinx populations. But, you know, it's very interesting, and I know some of you, during lunch, we were talking about suicidality and kind of what that looks like in your schools to a degree, what strategies and interventions are being utilized and adopted. And this subject is very close to me in the sense that we've done a couple of summits the last few years, suicide prevention summits, with the help of the Addiction Technology Transfer Center, now the MHTTC, and we want to continue that work, so we'll invite you all. But getting into social work, I never thought that I would be involved in suicide prevention or talking about suicidality, right? It's just not one of those subjects that you gravitate towards necessarily within school or take a lot of classes. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of trainings and classes on suicidality and how to approach it and how to deal with it. We got thrust into this field, my wife and I and my kids, when my stepchildren, my kids, I call them my kids, their dad committed suicide or took his life by suicide, I should say, when they were 18 and 16 years old. So my teenage son, daughter, and my other son were in the middle of their identity development, in the middle of all these different experiences, emotion-wise and hormone-wise, and all of those things. And it was very important for us at that point to understand. And what we didn't know was my oldest son was being exposed to substance use by his father when we weren't around, and when we, again, maybe we were asleep at the wheel to a degree. We thought we protected them and kept them safe and close. But at the end, my son very much experienced ACEs directly, right? Not necessarily from immigration or acculturation, but through the attachment and kind of that disruption in the attachment that he had with his dad. But the experience that we had, and why I tell you that story is, one, there's never a right time to get involved in suicide prevention, right? It's just something that as a practitioner and someone that may have, you're experiencing it because the people around you, the clients around you, the consumer around you is experiencing it, bringing it to you. It does nobody any good, especially you and potentially that individual, for you not to be prepared and ready to deal with that in some way, right? We will do more harm by pushing that youngster away and telling him, it's okay, you're going to get over it. It's just a breakup. It's just something we all go through, or don't worry about it. You're going to be reconnected with your dad or your mom. Well, we don't know those things, right? So we have to be very careful of what we put out there that is trying to lend some hope to people or to youngsters experiencing this. So what I tell you that, I want to share with you a couple of, 4 different kind of opportunities I think that you have. And I was informed that some of the school districts or the school district has used or been trained in question, persuade, and refer, which is QPR. Right, there's different thoughts on the evidence-based nature of this model and this approach, but I think with any of these models that you decide to adapt, if you are looking for a model for your own practice or for your school or for your community-based organization, is that these are definitely needing to be adapted, right? You definitely have to take the time to address Latino and Hispanic specific issues, especially relative to the populations you're serving. So if you're serving a high population of individuals who have immigrated, individuals who have had to acculturate into a mainstream community, you definitely want to take that into consideration, maybe versus someone who was actually spending time in a detention center, right, and had that experience and had those traumas kind of piled on, if you will. So the Yellow Ribbon campaign, just curious, how many of you are aware of Yellow Ribbon? Not too many. Well, that was, this model is born and bred in Colorado, right? For those of you that aren't aware, which is kind of exciting. It's not exciting that we don't know about it, right? They probably need to do a little bit more advertising around that. But the Yellow Ribbon campaign was created by a parents, a father and a mother who lost their 17-year-old son to suicide. He took his life by suicide. And they created the Yellow Ribbon campaign, which attached to it has about 4 or 5 different modules, which it's really comprehensive. One module is giving you, as the community organizer or advocate in that role, opportunities to leverage stakeholders within the community. Another aspect is important for you all as providers to train all of the staff that you have in your facility or in your agency or in your school. And when I say in your school, that means training everybody in your school. That means training the janitor to be aware of suicidality. It's important for us, especially with the Yellow Ribbon, and that's why I want to kind of break these down just a little bit for you. But the Yellow Ribbon campaign, they have what they call their Yellow Ribbon card, and I should have brought a few. The Yellow Ribbon card is basically a card that they hand out to all of their student body. And that Yellow Ribbon card has some different strategies and ideas that individual can employ for themselves. But it also has on there a statement that if they hand that card to an adult at their school, it gives that adult the important task of staying with that young person until they connect them to a mental health provider, or until they connect them to family and they can leverage mental health services, right? Or if need be, they need to call, 911, or they need to get that individual some more faster help, right? So thinking about that, the Yellow Ribbon campaign, it's very entailed. What's really cool about it is it comes with a packaged kind of content where there's forms that young people can fill out. What is really cool about it is what the important goal of the Yellow Ribbon campaign is to leverage, if you will, a task force of professionals within the agency or within the school. And those task force members then start to facilitate different trainings within the school and start to leverage different resources within the school to help push the model and meet fidelity of that model. What's really cool about it, I think, also is that it's gotten some pretty good press around its success within school, especially, and to me, this model seems to fit better at the elementary level, just because some of the activities that are a part of the model itself. Question, persuade, and refer, QPR. This is a training that I like because it's not as training intensive as the Yellow Ribbon campaign is. Typically, the Yellow Ribbon takes 2 or 3 days to do a training for an entire staff or school staff or community-based organization staff. Question, persuade, refer can be done in a couple hours, right? And it's basically teaching you some of the questions to ask, how to persuade someone to get help and to seek those services when they may not, really want to at that point, and then the important piece of referring and making sure that you stay with that individual until you connect them to other resources. The really cool thing is this one, and question, persuade, refer has different training for different professional level folks as well, which is kind of cool if you want kind of more of a specialty. How many of you, I'm sure, heard of mental health first aid at this point? It's pretty out there, pretty much out there. Now, of course, the one that's evolved in the last year or two is the adolescent version of that. One thing that we're doing, and I'll definitely be willing to share that with you as I hopefully finish it and maybe publish that, but in northern New Mexico, part of what we're doing with the local collaborative out in Northeast region is creating a adolescent peer-to-peer training curriculum that trains peer youngsters, adolescents, and it's not a new model, right? There's the model in schools already that is natural helpers and those sort of programs or models within school districts. But this one is a little bit different, where we're actually training those young people in mental health first aid. We're training them in some brief motivational interviewing, and we're training them in these 3 areas of harm reduction, from suicidality to violence and gang violence to substance use and misuse. So these adolescents, if you can imagine, these are the kiddos that potentially will be you all in the next 5 years or so, right? As they graduate high school, going into the field and becoming practitioners. So we're trying to give them a skill that when they get out of college, and these are, our goal, the prominent population in this area or region in New Mexico is Latino or Hispanic youngsters, right? So we're actually giving them marketable tools and skills that potentially they can use to make a little bit of money as they're going through college, as a skill set, right? Exposing them to that. Now, another big piece that you're going to hear in just a little bit, and I'm not going to steal her thunder, but how do you implement self-care? And that's a huge strategy that we're teaching within this model, is teaching young people to take care of themselves if they're going to be helpers and wanting to be kind of in this work area. So to me, That's a huge mistake that I saw that we made in the School of Social Work at New Mexico Highlands. As I was a part of that school for 15 years, we didn't do a lot around self-care. And I'm glad to see it now coming back and it being a prevalent part of schools of social work now, where you're talking about that. I think we can do even better, though, right? We can do even better with that topic. So adolescent mental health first aid now is teaching people. It's basically kind of this idea that if we teach everybody CPR, right, the potential for us to intervene in mental health crisis with mental health first aid will potentially lead people to services rather than maybe getting incarcerated. And maybe it's a better approach than having law enforcement intervene, right, with those individuals when it could be addressed by a behavioral health professional. The last model that I want to present to you, and I'm going to take a few minutes to get into this also just a little bit, is the CDC's Center for Disease Control Preventing Suicide, a technical package of policies, programs, and practices. Now, what I would say is, I think it's really important, depending on the level that you're at within your school district or community, of addressing suicidality. In our community in New Mexico, some of the health disparities around suicidality was significant. Number one in the nation, 4 or 5 times more likely than the national average for individuals to commit suicide and actually have a plan, right? And that's from some of the youth risk and resiliency data that has been put out there that I'll highlight here in just a minute. But the CDC's Preventing program, and this is again a hyperlink within the presentation that you can definitely utilize and review as you see fit. Oh, my clicker's not working here. Okie dokie. This computer wants to take a lunch break already, I think. So hopefully this slide will go forward. According to the CDC, again, there's some risk factors that include individual level, relationship level, and also we start to look at it at community-based levels, right? At the individual level, we have to take into consideration histories of depression or other mental illnesses.
Keep talking.
No, you're okay.
Okay, we're good.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Relation at the individual level, again, so this is kind of where it fits within the mental health kind of box, if you will, right? Individual level, history of depression, other mental illnesses, hopelessness, substance abuse, certain health conditions, previous suicide attempt, violence, victimization, and perpetuation, or perpetration, and genetic and biological determinants. Now, one word that I want to kind of pull out of there, right, is this. The Youth Risk and Resiliency Study, or YRRS data, and if you just do a YRRS search, you'll get a whole host of different data sets that they provide and the different schools that provide that data to this study. It asks young people questions about hope. Have you felt hopeless within the last 6 months, 12 months, right? And when you talk about research and this whole clinical kind of world, how do you instill hope? How do you do that, right? I think those are things that we really have to think about, especially as we look at some of the data here at the end, is how do you instill hope in young people? How do you lend young people a vision of hope when they've lost hope for themselves, right? And as clinicians or as social workers, future clinicians, future practitioners, grappling with that is really something to me as a practitioner that I've done over time, and I think it's important to really just see what that looks like for folks. All the other things, substance abuse, mental health, certain health conditions, we have models for those, right? We have strategies, we have approaches. How about for hopelessness? I always used to get flack within the graduate school. One of my colleagues at one point, I wrote the word love on, and I was teaching a graduate class, right? I wrote the word love on the board. And of course, there's some graduate students, which I'm sure there may be some of you here that look at that word and say, well, That's unethical. We can't be talking about that, and we can't, by golly, we can't be sharing love, and we can't, well, maybe that's where we're missing the boat, right? I'm not talking about intimacy. I'm not talking about sex or sexuality. I'm not talking about any of that. But how do you show love to your clients? How do you show compassion to your clients in an appropriate professional way, right? Especially young people, especially young people. So with that said, the relationship level, and as you all know, it's been echoed throughout the presentations before me, is the relationship is the key aspect of any success that you're going to have with Latino and Hispanic clientele and persons. Really being able to have a relationship because of some of the things that you see here. The relationships that they may have experienced before coming to you may have been highly conflictual, may have been violent. Sense of isolation, and now we're seeing that obviously through some of the experiences that the detainees, if you will, at these prison camps are experiencing, isolation in different forms. Lack of social support, family, loved ones' history of suicide, financial, and work stress. The last two that the CDC talks about is the community level and societal level. So inadequate community connectedness, barriers to healthcare. Hanet, I think, gave an excellent description of equity, right, and what that means and what that looks like. Societal level, looking at the availability of lethal means of suicide, unsafe media portrayals of suicide, stigma associated with help seeking and mental illness. It's very interesting how suicide has taken shape and form on social media as well, right? Some of these different challenges, if you will, that are being put out there around suicide, around violence, that young people are susceptible to, is very important for us to take inventory of. The other thing that I usually try to talk with clinicians about when I'm doing supervision is really asking them, do you go into detail, especially with young people, do you go into detail and asking them about what social media sites that they're experiencing or they're exposed to? Do you even ask them to share you some of their sites? And to a certain degree, some of those young people that you're visiting with may be reluctant to do that, but it's about building that relationship and trust, right? If they're being exposed to all these different images of violence and death and suicide, and we're trying to counter that, that's an uphill battle that we have to really be able to assess what's countering the work that we're trying to implement with young people, right? So having a relationship enough to where they're comfortable sharing, these are the sites that I go to. This is what I experience, and this is what I'm exposed to when we talk about discourse. Let me see the last one here. I think we kind of touched on that. So I want to spend just a little bit of time. And I think I have about 10 more minutes or so. Related harm reduction areas to consider, especially for the Hispanic and Latino ex-adolescent substance use, misuse, abuse, and street gang membership. So gang membership prevention, and this is just a couple of brief slides that I wanted to share with you. I really don't think, and I'm thankful that the folks over at the MHTTC allowed me to kind of expand this into looking at prevention and harm reduction from those three different aspects, right? Not just suicidality, because we know that typically 70 to 80% of those individuals who have attempted or taken their life by suicide, there's some substance use going on, right? Or there's some mental health going on. That's the comorbidity of those issues that we have to address. So address community responses to consequences in the form of model intervention and prevention programs, present practical suggestions on how to conduct outreach and engage, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about very briefly here as well. So the strategies that work best when we're talking about gang problems or violence within your community is creating and getting a sense of the fact that there's not one single strategy that you have to implement. It has to be a multifaceted approach. How many of you have heard of Spergel's work out of Chicago, University of Chicago? He wrote the comprehensive gang model. So those of you that are seeing a gang issue raising up in your community, and it's very interesting when we talk about ACES and trauma, right? And we see young Latino Hispanic males gravitating towards gang activity. There's something to be said about the fight or flight stuff that's going on within the brain, right? More cessation seeking, more risk taking, more attempts at risky behaviors than maybe their counterpart that hasn't experienced and hasn't gone through that immigration trauma or migration trauma, right? So looking at those, when you're talking with Latino Hispanic youth that are involved in gangs or are thinking about getting involved in gangs, start to have that conversation with them, right, about what their history of experience with immigration and acculturation is as well. A promising approach is to think of different strategies that can be combined into meaningful ways, and that's what Spergel did. One of the things that I would say, and with these bright lights up here, it takes me back to my childhood and fracturing a few laws when I was a kid, and turn the bright lights off, right, the interrogation part of things. We have to be cautious also that we don't stereotype our young Latino males, right? Just because they dress a certain way, they wear a ball cap a certain way, talk a certain style, doesn't mean that we should automatically lump them into a gang, right? So racial profiling is definitely something that we have to find a balance in, and we can't assume the worst in that sense. But what I was getting to is Spergel, and the bright lights kind of threw me off. Spergel definitely implements also leveraging law enforcement. And for some of you, maybe like me, that grew up with a distrust for law enforcement or grew up with this kind of us against them given where I grew up, right? And I think that's the important part that we have to get past. And thankfully, I think with my professional growth, now I see law enforcement as a significant partner in the process. What you have to try to assess, though, is where do they stand in terms of their approach? Are they wanting to do more suppression and locking young people up? Or are they wanting to take a more harm reduction approach to gang intervention and gang strategies and approaches? And sometimes it's about you changing the mind of law enforcement that wants to suppress gangs and really hold them, down and punish them. There's a balance that we have to follow, I think, there, or find. The last bullet here is drug using behavior, of course. There's something that we did within the gang model. So we have a gang presentation, like I mentioned. It's 4 modules. We come out and talk about these issues in more depth. But part of what we also did is break that up into typologies. And Dr. Valdez out of University of Southern California created the typologies for gang-involved Latino youth. Right? Some gangs are adult-dependent gangs, meaning that they have adult leadership, and typically those gangs are more involved in trafficking and stolen property and those sort of things. When you have a non-adult gang, which is more of these tagging crews, is one of the labels that some of the young people in our community have got, where they're just guys that hang out together, that go out and do graffiti together, but they're in these different categories. So I say that, and the other prominent gangs in our neck of the woods in New Mexico, Albuquerque specifically, are barrio gangs, right? Where these barrio gangs are more of gangs that are within certain communities that have been a part of that community for several years, right? 20, 30, 40 years in some cases. The last pieces that I'll talk about relative to gang problem is coming up with a comprehensive community mobilization strategies. And that includes identifying substance use, identifying suicidality. I firmly believe that if we truly knew how many people that actually overdosed and died from an overdose was a suicide, right? We don't know those true numbers. We'll never know those true numbers. Because we can't interview those folks to understand, did you intentionally take your life, or was it an accidental overdose, right? So comprehensive community mobilization is key. In order to be effective, strategies need to offer enhanced options to incarceration and probation. How many of you heard of Father Boyle? 2 or 3, 4 or 5? Yeah, Homeboy Industries. Look up Homeboy Industries for any of you that are really interested in the gang stuff and or nonprofits. He created a nonprofit that is a multi-million-dollar nonprofit now that has all these different business ventures that helps put ex-gang members into work fields. He created a bakery. They created a screen printing shop. And then they also have the gang intervention components of that. And at this point, he's helped hundreds of gang members, change their approach. The last piece here that I'll talk about with relative to the gangs, and I'm not going to go through each of this, but OJJDP, Office of Juvenile Justice, put together ways that you can assess gang models for their appropriateness for your communities, based around soundness, program fidelity, the strength of the evaluator's design, empirical evidence, and they do this based on 3 levels. Program has been scientifically proven. Program has all of the same aspects as level 1, but provides experimental or quasi-experimental component. And then 3, program displays a strong theoretical base, proven to reduce delinquency. So this is kind of what Haned talked about when you're talking about evidence-based models, primary, secondary, and tertiary effects, right? Those are definitely things that you want to take into consideration when you're adopting a model. The last piece that I'll leave you with, and I want to read some stats for you all, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir to a degree here, but when we talk about mental health, and this is in northern New Mexico, this is part of the YRRS studies that have been done, and this is for 8th grade to 12th grade at Espanola high schools. Basically, as you see here, from 2005 to 2017, we're seeing increases in injecting drugs, young people injecting drugs, right? We see kind of a spike here at 2011, and then it kind of goes down, and then it comes back in 2017. Methamphetamine use and heroin use. These are the drugs that are of most prevalence in northern New Mexico, where I'm from, that we're starting to really intervene with and address. But the disparities, when you look at this compared nationally, are 4 or 5 times the national average, right? So when we talk about health disparities, it's not just the access that people have to that, but it's the lack of access that they have to treatment and to quality care when they decide that they want to get clean or that they want to get better, right? Or get off of drugs and alcohol. This one is pretty telling, and it talks just a little bit about what I mentioned relative to suicidality. And as you can see here at the top, New Mexico relative compared to Rio Arriba County. And Rio Arriba County, for those of you that aren't aware, that's the that's the county that skirts right up against to your state line near Pagosa, right? Chama and Pagosa, southern Colorado. So in this vein, we see a pretty large number, Rio Arriba compared to New Mexico, 5% engage in non-suicidal self-injury. So these individuals may be self-harming, cutting themselves, burning themselves, those sort of things, right? Felt sad or hopeless, 38 compared to 36. So even in New Mexico, that's a very high percentage. 36% of high school students in Espanola felt sad or hopeless. Significant numbers, right? Seriously considered suicide, made a suicide plan, attempted suicide, or injured in a suicide attempt. And then it breaks it down even further by male and female. To Dr. Zayas' point in research, you see the females in the light blue numbers here, right? Huge numbers relative to suicidality compared to their male counterparts. So what is that about? Right? Of course, we definitely know it's the internal kind of emotional stuff that young women deal with that tend to turn that into their own abuse, etc. So I'm going to leave you, because I know Mr. Angel is right here waiting for me. I'm going to leave you guys with a few statistics from Colorado, right? And these may be new to you or they may not. But suicide claimed 1,093 lives in Colorado in 2015. The most ever recorded in 1 year, according to the latest data from Colorado Department of Health and the Environment Department of Physical Health, I believe it says. Since 2000, when Colorado recorded 612 suicide deaths, the annual number of suicides has increased by 79%. 79%. So when we talk about this unwillingness from administrators or superintendents or those folks at the top that are not wanting to hear this stuff, we got to make more noise about it, right? We got to be advocates about this. We got to bring in, when it's you that's the only person kind of chirping about the issue, you got to leverage your expertise here in the Hispanic Latino folks to come in into your community and really make an issue about this. Our kids are dying. Latino and Hispanic kids are dying, right? Now, with that said, 7.2% of adults surveyed reported having considered suicide in the last 30 days. 17.3% of youth surveyed reported considering attempting suicide in the past 12 months. 27% of youth surveyed reported to feel sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 weeks or more in a row that they stopped doing their usual activities in the past 12 months. 64%, and this is a whole other area that I feel we as a professional group as well have to do more in, is our LGBTQ plus populations. So get this, 64% of LGB youth surveyed reported to feel sad or hopeless almost every day for 2 weeks or more in a row that they stopped doing their usual activities in the past 12 months. 64%. That's unacceptable, right? 71% of students who reported that mental health is not good 1 or more days during the past 30 days. And then 15% of students reported making a plan of suicide. So with that said, I think we're all ready to bring up Fabiola and have her help us decompress from all this stress, right? and all this stuff. I'll leave you with this. There is hope. There is hope, right? And the fact that you have a group of professionals that is actively doing this research and trying to get this out to you all, definitely reach out, right? Use that resource and use this powerful, I think, team to really leverage movement within your communities as well. I think that's one of the best things that I love about not being a part of a university or bureaucracy anymore. Sometimes I can say things that other people wouldn't say, and be very direct about it, right? Because I don't have anything to lose. They can't fire me, right? But with that said, thank you for the time. Thank you for inviting me and having me here, for a few minutes with you. And thanks again for the time.